They say Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. The history books will tell you his heart finally gave out in his Beverly Hills home, surrounded by the silence he had come to crave. The obituaries listed his movies, his songs, his jokes, and his legendary coolness. They spoke of emphysema and old age, of a lifelong smoker who had finally run out of time. The world mourned the king of cool, and the lights on the Las Vegas Strip dimmed in his honor. A final tribute to a man who had once made them shine brighter than anywhere else on earth. But his friends knew the truth. His family knew the truth. Those who really loved Dean Martin understood that the man who died in 1995 was just a shell, a ghost haunting a body that had forgotten how to live. The real Dean Martin, the man who laughed with that effortless charm, the man who loved deeper than anyone knew, the man who lit up every room he entered, actually died 8 years earlier on a snowy mountainside in California. He died on March 21st, 1987, the day a telephone call brought him to his knees and ripped the soul right out of his chest. Because on that day, the king of cool didn't lose his fame. He didn't lose his money. He didn't lose his voice or his movies or his place in Hollywood history. He lost his son. And when he lost his son, he lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. He lost the reason he had kept playing the game for so long. He lost the validation that all of his success had been worth something. He lost his golden boy. And in losing him, Dean Martin lost himself. This is a heartbreaking, untold story of the night the music stopped forever. This is the story of father's silent scream that echoed for 8 long years until he finally found his peace in the grave. This is a story of how a plane crash on a mountain didn't just kill Dean Paul Martin. It killed his father too. It just took Dean Martin 8 more years to stop breathing. To understand the magnitude of the tragedy that destroyed Dean Martin, you first have to understand the bond he shared with his son, Dean Paul Martin, known to the world and his family simply as Dino Jr. In the constellation of the Martin family, with its 8 children spread across 3 marriages, Dino was always the brightest star. He was everything Dean was and everything Dean wanted to be. Handsome beyond measure, talented in ways that seemed almost unfair, athletic, accomplished, and possessed of that same effortless charm that made his father a legend. Dino Jr. was the golden boy, and everyone knew it. He was a tennis pro who competed at Wimbledon, his powerful serve and graceful movements on the court drawing comparisons to the greats of the game. He was an actor who earned a Golden Globe nomination for his role in the 1979 film Players, starring alongside Ollie McGraw, proving he had inherited his father's screen presence. He was a musician, forming the rock band Dino, Desi and Billy at age 13 with Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch, achieving real chart success without riding entirely on his father's coattails. Their songs, I'm a Fool and Not the Loving Kind, both cracked the Billboard Top 30 in 1965, when Dean Paul was just 14 years old. He was a semi-professional football player, his body honed by discipline and dedication. He was a pre-med student at UCLA, his intelligence matching his physical gifts. He was a race car driver who lived for speed and adrenaline. But more than all of that, he was a pilot. And not just any pilot. He was a captain in the California Air National Guard, flying F-4 Phantom jets, those screaming beasts of metal that could break the sound barrier and touch the edge of heaven. To Dean, who had spent his entire life pretending to be a drunk on stage while secretly being a dedicated family man and hard worker, Dino was his validation. He was the proof that Dean had done something right in this crazy world. He was evidence that the Martin name meant something beyond showbiz tricks and carefully cultivated coolness. They were more than father and son. They were best friends. They played golf together on sun-drenched California courses, Dean teaching his boy the subtle art of the game. They cracked jokes together with that same timing that seemed to run in their blood. They understood each other in a way that didn't require words, communicating through glances and grins, and a kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who truly know one another. Dean, a man who famously kept everyone at arm's length, who built a wall of cool around himself that no one could penetrate, who played the role of the carefree crooner so perfectly that people forgot it was a role, lowered the drawbridge for Dino. Dino was the only one who truly saw the man behind the tuxedo, behind the cocktail glass, behind the sleepy-eyed smile. He saw his father not as Dean Martin the entertainer, but as Dino Crocetti from Steubenville, Ohio, the immigrant son who had clawed his way to the top and never forgotten where he came from. Dean would look at his son and see his own immortality. He saw a better version of himself, unburdened by the compromises and calculations that had marked his own rise to fame. He saw a future where the Martin name would continue to shine, not because of clever marketing or lucky breaks, but because of genuine merit. When friends would marvel at Dino's accomplishments, Dean would swell with pride in a way that no standing ovation had ever made him feel. Dino was the anchor that kept Dean's feet on the ground. When the pressures of fame got too heavy, when the demands of Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack lifestyle wore him down, when the hollowness of Hollywood revealed itself in all its vapid glory, Dean would look at his son, this strapping, brave, beautiful young man serving his country in the skies, risking his life for something bigger than entertainment. And Dean would feel a swelling of pride that no applause could ever match. He called him Captain. He bragged about him to anyone who would listen, his voice taking on a tone of genuine awe that was completely different from the practiced nonchalance of his stage persona. "That's my boy," he would say, pointing to a picture of Dino in his flight suit, looking every inch the American hero. "He flies jets. I just sing songs." It was a humble brag, sure, but it was also the truest thing Dean ever said. He revered his son in a way that transcended typical paternal pride. Dino represented everything good and pure in Dean's life, untainted by the compromises of show business. And that reverence, that deep unspoken connection between father and son, was what made the events of March 1987 not just a tragedy, but a spiritual execution. It was what made Dean Martin's subsequent slow death not just sad, but inevitable. Because when you build your entire sense of worth around one person, when someone becomes your validation, and you're proof that your life meant something, losing them doesn't just break your heart. It erases your identity. It steals your reason for breathing. March 21st, 1987 started like any other Saturday in Los Angeles. The sun rose over the sprawling city, painting the smog-choked sky in shades of pink and orange. In Beverly Hills, Dean Martin was likely at home, maybe watching television, perhaps a golf tournament or an old western, nursing a soft drink despite his reputation as a drinker. He was 70 years old, comfortably retired from the grind of constant performance, enjoying the quiet luxury he had earned through decades of work. He had no idea that 60 miles away, his world was about to end. In the San Bernardino Mountains, a beast was waking up. A freak snowstorm was swirling around the peaks, particularly around Mount San Gorgonio, the highest point in Southern California at 11,500 feet. The weather was treacherous, the kind that makes experienced pilots nervous. Thick clouds rolled in like waves, blinding and disorienting. The snow fell in sheets, erasing the horizon and turning the world into a featureless void. Winds howled to the peaks like banshees, creating unpredictable turbulence that could throw a jet around like a toy. Captain Dean Paul Martin and his weapons systems officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, were scheduled for a routine training mission that afternoon. They were flying an F-4C Phantom, serial number 64-0923, a beast of machine capable of speeds over 500 miles per hour. The F-4 Phantom was a legend of American military aviation, a twin-engine fighter that had served with distinction in Vietnam and beyond. In the right hands, it was a magnificent machine. But on this day, even the best pilot in the world would face nature as a superior force. The mission was supposed to be simple, a departure procedure that would take them up to the cloud layers and out toward the desert for practice bombing runs. Just routine training, the kind Dino had done hundreds of times before. They took off from March Air Force Base in Riverside County in the early afternoon. Dino was piloting, Captain Ortiz managing the weapon systems from the back seat. Two other F-4s were with them, part of the 196th Tactical Fighter Squadron, 163rd Tactical Fighter Group, California Air National Guard. Back in Beverly Hills, Dean Martin was completely unaware that his world was about to end. He had no premonition, no sudden chill, no inexplicable dread. He was safe in his home, surrounded by the comfortable luxury that success had brought him. The sun might have even been peeking through the clouds over his pool. He didn't feel the disturbance in the air 60 miles away. He didn't know that his golden boy was about to be erased from the sky. At 1:52 in the afternoon, Dino's jet requested a left turn from air traffic control to avoid the towering, ominous clouds that were blocking their path. The controller approved the turn. This is where accounts of what happened next become fragmented, pieced together from radar data and witness statements. In the confusion of the storm, amidst the swirling whiteout conditions that erased the horizon and turned the world into a featureless void, something went terribly, catastrophically wrong. The jet, traveling at over 400 miles per hour, didn't turn away from the mountain. Whether it was spatial disorientation from climbing through cloud layers, whether it was a malfunction, whether it was pilot error exacerbated by the weather, we'll never know for certain. Some reports suggested that just before the flight, someone in the weather office had mentioned to Dino that his ex-wife, Olympic figure skater Dorothy Hamill, had remarried 2 weeks earlier. Dino had been unaware of this and was visibly shaken. Whether this distraction played a role in what happened next is speculation, but it adds another layer of tragedy to an already unbearable story. What we do know is this. The F-4 Phantom suddenly dropped 4,000 feet. It was flying inverted when it slammed into the granite face of Mount San Gorgonio at approximately 560 miles per hour. The terrain of San Gorgonio is unforgiving, a wall of rock and ice that rises like a monument to nature's indifference. In the blinding snow, Dino wouldn't have seen the mountain until it was far too late. There would have been no time to scream, no time to be afraid, no time to think of his father or his son Alexander or any of the people he loved. One moment, they were flying. The next, there was only darkness in the mountain and the end of everything. The impact was cataclysmic. The explosion would have been muffled by the heavy snow, a silent fireball quickly extinguished by the blizzard. Captain Dean Paul Martin and Captain Ramon Ortiz perished instantly. They were vaporized by the force of the impact, their bodies and their aircraft becoming one with the mountain in a fraction of a second. At 5,500 feet on the eastern side of the peak, in an area called Wood Canyon, the wreckage scattered across the granite and the snow. And in that instant, 2 men were gone from this world, and one father's life was over, even though he didn't know it yet. Back in Beverly Hills, the phone hadn't rung yet. The sun might have still been shining on Dean's pool. He was safe. He was calm. He didn't feel the disturbance in the air. He didn't know that his golden boy had just been erased from the sky, that the one person who gave his life meaning was gone forever. But the silence was coming. The radar blip had vanished from the screens at March Air Force Base. The controllers called out desperately into the void. Grizzly 72, come in. Grizzly 72, do you read? Nothing. Just static. Just the terrible silence that meant everything and nothing. And in that static lay a nightmare that would consume Dean Martin for the rest of his life. The news didn't come immediately. It started as a worry, a delayed return, a missing blip on a radar screen. But when the phone finally rang at Dean's house, the voice on the other end wasn't Dino calling to say he'd landed safely. It was an official from the California Air National Guard. His voice carefully measured and professional in a way that people sound when they're delivering the worst news imaginable. Mr. Martin, your son's plane is missing. We've lost contact with the aircraft. Those words are the most terrifying sentence a parent can hear. Missing. It implies hope, but it carries the crushing weight of doom. It's a word that leaves you suspended between terror and denial, unable to fully accept what you already know deep in your bones. For the next 3 days, Dean Martin entered a personal hell that no Dante could adequately describe, a purgatory where hope and horror warred for control of the soul. The storm on the mountain was so severe that search and rescue teams couldn't get near the crash site. Helicopters were grounded by the weather, their rotors useless against the howling winds and zero visibility. Foot patrols were turned back by avalanches and conditions that would have killed the rescuers before they found anything. The mountain had claimed its victims, and now it guarded them jealously, refusing to give up its dead. Dean sat in his living room for 3 days that must have felt like 3 lifetimes. He didn't sleep. How could he sleep when his boy might be out there on that mountain, cold and alone and waiting for rescue? He didn't eat. Food was an obscenity when Dino might be hungry or hurt or dying. He chain smoked pack after pack of cigarettes, the blue haze surrounding him like a funeral shroud. The same habit that would eventually kill him, but which now served as his only comfort. The smoke swirled around him. matching the fog in his mind, the disbelief that this could be happening to him, to his boy, to his golden child who was supposed to outlive him by decades. He stared at the telephone as if by sheer force so he could make it ring with good news. He imagined scenarios in endless permutations, each one a desperate fantasy. Maybe Dino had ejected. Maybe he was sitting on a mountainside wrapped in his parachute, cold but alive, his survival training, keeping him going until rescue arrived. Maybe he had walked away from the crash, was even now making his way down the mountain, would call any minute to say he was okay. Dean clung to these fantasies with the desperation of a drowning man clinging to driftwood, knowing they were probably lies but unable to let them go. Friends came by to offer support. Frank Sinatra, his partner through decades of triumph and occasional conflict, showed up looking haggard and helpless. Sammy Davis Jr. came, his perpetual smile replaced by genuine sorrow. Jerry Lewis, Dean's former partner and sometimes friend, called multiple times. But Dean barely spoke to them. What could they say? What comfort could anyone offer when your child was missing on a mountain in a snowstorm? He was in a trance of agony, no longer the king of cool, but just a frightened father trembling in his pajamas. He paced the floor, walking miles on his expensive carpets, wearing a path between the living room and the kitchen, and back again. He muttered prayers he hadn't said since he was a boy in Steubenville, appeals to the God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Please, God, take everything. Take the money. Take the fame. Take the houses and the cars and the records and the movies. Just give me my boy. Just let him be alive. Just let me have more time with him. But God wasn't bargaining that week. The storm raged on, covering the mountain in a shroud of white, hiding the wreckage and the truth. Every hour that passed without news was a torture session, the not knowing a razor blade slicing through Dean's sanity. He would pour a drink, look at it, and put it down, feeling guilty for even thinking of comfort while his son might be freezing on a mountain. His hands shook. His eyes were red and hollow. The man who had made millions laugh couldn't even remember what laughter sounded like. In his desperation, Dean Martin did something that might seem strange to some, but perfectly understandable to any parent in his position. He hired 2 psychics. One was brought to Martin home and given one of Dino's flight suits to touch, to see if psychic impressions could reveal his fate. The psychic touched the fabric and recoiled as if burned, saying simply he's dead. I'm sorry. He's already gone. Dean's heart broke a little more. The second psychic pointed them toward San Gorgonio Mountain, the same peak where, in a cruel twist of fate, Frank Sinatra's mother Dolly had died in a plane crash years earlier. The mountain that had already taken so much from the Rat Pack seemed hungry for more. Finally, on the 3rd day, the weather broke. The storm that had seemed eternal finally passed, leaving the mountain under a blanket of pristine white. Search helicopters lifted off from March Air Force Base, their rotors cutting through the clear air. They spotted the scar on the granite face, a dark wound against the white. They spotted the wreckage, twisted metal scattered across the rock like confetti from hell. There was no parachute. There was no survival shelter. There was no Dino walking down the mountain with a smile and a story. There was only death and finality. When the confirmation came that Dino was gone, that he had died instantly upon impact, that there had been no suffering and no hope and no miracle, Dean Martin didn't scream. He didn't throw things or rage against the injustice of the universe. He didn't sob dramatically or collapse on the floor. He simply collapsed inward, like a building being demolished from within. It was as if the strings that held his puppet body together had been cut. The light in his eyes, that mischievous twinkle that had charmed the world for 40 years, flickered out and died. He became a shell, an automaton going through the motions of being alive, without actually living. He hung up the phone and sat in his favorite chair, staring at a blank television screen. The silence in the room was deafening, the sound of a heart breaking beyond repair. There were no more fantasies to cling to, no more hope to sustain him. His golden boy was gone, and Dean Martin knew in that moment that his own life was over too. It would just take 8 more years for his body to catch up with what his soul already knew. The funeral was a blur of black limousines, weeping celebrities and military honors. Over 200 people gathered at Los Angeles National Cemetery in Westwood on March 25, 1987. A folded American flag was presented to the family, that triangular reminder of service and sacrifice. The sound of taps played on a lonely bugle echoed across the cemetery, each mournful note a knife in Dean's heart. Fighter jets flew overhead in the missing man formation, one peeling off to represent the fallen pilot. A tradition that never fails to bring tears. Dean Martin was there physically, but spiritually he was miles away, already standing at his own grave. He moved like a robot, his famous fluidity replaced by stiff mechanical movements. He wore his dark glasses not to look cool, but to hide eyes that were swollen and dead, that had seen too much pain and couldn't bear to see any more. People tried to comfort him. Jerry Lewis was there, their decades-old feud meaningless in the face of this tragedy. Frank Sinatra was there, tears streaming down his face for his friend's pain. Sammy Davis Jr. was there. Lucille Ball was there. Desi Arnaz Jr. was there, mourning his childhood friend. All of Hollywood seemed to turn out to pay respects. They said things that people always say at funerals. They told Dean that Dino died a hero, serving his country. They said he didn't suffer, that it was instantaneous. They said time would heal, that Dean would get through this, that life goes on. Dean nodded politely at each of these well-meaning lies, but he didn't hear them. All he could hear was a silence where his son's laugh used to be. All he could feel was the absence of the one person who had made everything worthwhile. At the graveside, Dean looked older than his 70 years. The vitality that defined him, that effortless cool that had been his trademark, was gone, replaced by a gray, hollow fragility. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 3 days. He touched the casket, a gentle, lingering touch, as if he were tucking Dino in for the night one last time. Witnesses say he whispered something, but no one knows for sure what it was. Maybe it was, "I love you." Maybe it was, "I'm sorry." Maybe it was, "Wait for me." Whatever it was a private goodbye between father and son, the last moment of connection before the earth claimed one and began its slow claim on the other. After the funeral, Dean retreated into his fortress. He shut the gates of his Beverly Hills home and withdrew from the world. He stopped returning calls. He stopped going to parties. He stopped being Dean Martin, the entertainer, and became just Dean, a broken father mourning a loss he couldn't comprehend. The world wanted Dean Martin back. They wanted the jokes and the songs and the cool persona. But Dean Martin didn't want the world. He didn't want anything except the one thing he couldn't have. He felt betrayed by life in a fundamental way. He had played by the rules. He had worked hard, provided for his family, never complained about the grind. He had entertained millions, brought joy to people's lives, never hurt anyone. And this was his reward? To bury his child? It made no sense. It was a cruel joke. And for the first time in his life, Dean didn't find the joke funny. The injustice of it gnawed at him, the randomness of a storm and a mountain taking his boy. He began to shed the trappings of his stardom like dead skin. He didn't care about the records or the ratings or the reviews. He didn't care about maintaining his image or his legacy. He sat in his room watching old westerns on a loop, hour after hour, day after day. Why westerns? Perhaps because in westerns, the world made sense. The good guys won. Death had a reason. Justice prevailed. The complex, painful reality of 1987, where random chance could erase your child from existence, was too much to bear. The simplicity of a John Wayne movie was a comfort, a reminder of a world that no longer existed, if it ever had. He became a ghost in his own life, drifting from room to room in his big, empty house, carrying the heavy, invisible burden of grief that pressed down on his shoulders like the weight of that mountain. He would wake up in the morning and for a split second forget what had happened. Then reality would crash back in, and he would have to remember all over again that Dino was gone. Each day was a marathon of remembering and surviving, of getting to the next hour and then the next, with no end in sight. A year after the crash, in 1988, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. hatched what they thought was a brilliant plan to save their friend. They saw Dean fading away, dying of a broken heart in slow motion, and they decided that what he needed was to get back on stage. The applause would heal him, they thought. The music would bring him back to life. The camaraderie of performing together would remind him that he still had friends, still had a place in the world. They proposed a massive reunion tour, the Together Again National Concert Tour. The Rat Pack back on stage, filling stadiums, reliving the glory days. 29 cities, 40 performances, $500,000 a night. It would be the biggest tour of their careers, a victory lap for three legends who had defined cool for an entire generation. Frank believed with all his heart that this would save Dean. He didn't understand that Dean didn't want to be saved. He just wanted to be left alone with his grief. But Dean, ever the loyal friend, agreed to do the tour. He didn't want to let Frank and Sammy down. They had been his brothers for decades, through good times and bad. If they needed him, if they thought this would help, he would try. He would put on the tuxedo one more time, stand on that stage, and pretend to be Dean Martin for them. It was perhaps the most loving thing he could do, to sacrifice his solitude for their hope. The tour started in Oakland on March 13, 1988, almost exactly a year after Dino's death. 14,500 people packed the Oakland-Alameda County Coliseum Arena, a sold-out crowd ready to see their heroes one more time. The anticipation was electric. The three men took the stage separately, each doing their signature songs, then came together for a medley and banner that was supposed to recreate the magic of their Vegas heyday. But it was a disaster for Dean from the very first show. He stood on stage in that massive arena and looked utterly lost. The old magic, the effortless timing, the natural charisma, all of it was gone. He forgot lyrics to songs he had sung thousands of times. He slurred his lines, not from alcohol, but from a complete lack of interest in what he was doing. His voice, once smooth as silk, couldn't carry to the top of the arena. People in the crowd started yelling louder, louder, which only made everything worse. He looked at the audience and saw thousands of strangers who wanted him to be funny, who wanted him to be Dino the Entertainer, while his heart was bleeding for Dino his son. He felt like a clown performing at a funeral. The disconnect between what the audience expected and what he was capable of giving was unbearable. During one performance, he was so contemptuous of the whole situation that he flicked a live cigarette into the Oakland audience, an act of subtle violence that spoke volumes about his mental state. Behind the scenes, things were even worse. Sinatra was furious with Dean's lackluster performances. There are reports that at one point, Frank actually threw a plate of spaghetti at Dean's head. So frustrated was he with his friend's apparent lack of effort. But Frank didn't understand. Dean wasn't being lazy or difficult. He was drowning, and the stage was just another weight pulling him under. The shows continued through Vancouver, through various cities, each one a fresh torture for Dean. He would stand in his hotel room before each performance and wonder how he was going to get through it. The other members of the tour couldn't understand why he wasn't rallying, why the audience response wasn't lifting his spirits. Sammy tried to be encouraging, tried to joke with Dean like the old days. But the jokes fell flat because Dean was somewhere else entirely, standing at a graveside on a mountain, saying goodbye to his boy over and over again. It all came to a head in Chicago on March 20th, 1988. After just 6 performances, after trying so hard to be who everyone wanted him to be, Dean Martin reached his breaking point. During the show, he turned to Frank on stage and said quietly but clearly, "Frank, what the hell are we doing up here?" It was a moment of brutal honesty, a question that cut through all the pretense. What were they doing? Playing dress-up? Pretending to be young? Pretending that life was still fun and cool when Dean's son was dead and nothing would ever be fun again? Frank tried to rally him, tried to push him through. "Come on, Dean, let's knock him dead." It was a wrong choice of words. Dean had nothing left to give. He threw a cigarette down onto the stage, walked off mid-performance, and went straight to the airport. He didn't say goodbye to the crew. He didn't finish the tour. He didn't explain himself to anyone who didn't already understand. He just flew home to Los Angeles, leaving the tour, leaving the money, leaving the legend behind. He checked himself into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, officially for kidney problems. But everyone who knew him understood the truth. It was a soul problem, not a kidney problem. The kidneys were just an excuse, a way to save face and get out of a situation that was killing him. He was done. He had tried to be Dean Martin one last time for his friends, but the mask wouldn't stick anymore. It slid off his face, revealing the grieving father underneath. And he didn't have the strength to put it back on. That night in Chicago was the last time the real Rat Pack ever existed. Frank and Sammy continued the tour with Liza Minnelli replacing Dean, but it wasn't the same. How could it be? Dean had walked away not out of arrogance or ego, but out of exhaustion. He had realized that no amount of applause could fill the hole in his life, that standing ovations were meaningless when the one person whose approval he actually wanted was buried in the ground. The final 7.5 years of Dean Martin's life were a study in solitude. He didn't become a recluse in the Howard Hughes sense, hiding from the world in paranoia. He just became a man who was finished with the noise. He established a quiet routine that he followed with monastic discipline. Every evening, he would put on a nice outfit, always dressing for dinner out of habit and self-respect. Navy pants and a light blue shirt became his uniform. Then he would drive to his favorite Italian restaurant, La Famiglia or sometimes Da Vinci, both in Beverly Hills. He would sit at the same table every time. The staff knew not to disturb him, knew not to make a fuss over Dean Martin the star. They would bring him his food, clams casino or pasta fagioli, his glass of wine, and often Dean would have them set a place setting for the empty chair opposite him. Some people who saw this whispered that he was waiting for Frank to show up. Others assumed he was waiting for a woman. But those who knew him understood the heartbreaking truth. That empty chair was for Dino. He was having dinner with his son. He would sit there for hours, eating slowly, methodically, like a man going through the motions of living without actually being alive. He would sip his wine and stare into the middle distance, lost in a conversation that only he could hear. The clam juice would drip down his shirt, and he wouldn't notice or care. His ex-wife Jean would sometimes be at a nearby table, watching over him from a distance, maintaining a silent vigil over the man she had once loved and still cared for deeply. It was a strange, sad tableau, like something from a Fellini film. Fans would sometimes approach him, asking for an autograph, and Dean would always be polite. He would sign the napkin, smile that sleepy smile that had once meant so much and now meant nothing, and say, "You're welcome, pal," in that familiar voice. But the eyes were vacant. They were the eyes of a man who was just waiting for permission to leave, who was serving out his time like a prisoner, counting days until release. His daughter Deanna would call and ask if she and her husband could join him for dinner. "Sure," Dean would say, "just no chit-chat." "I don't mind the chit, it's the chat." He wanted quiet. He wanted simple presence without the exhausting effort of conversation. He was secure in who he was. Deanna insisted to reporters, but it was clear to everyone that he was also devastated, that the sadness had become a permanent part of his existence. He spent his days watching television, the same old westerns on a loop, providing a comforting background hum of familiarity. He played golf until his body became too weak, his swing losing its smoothness, his drives falling short. He slept or tried to, though the sleep of the grieving is never restful. He wasn't sad in a dramatic, weeping way anymore. The acute grief had settled into a chronic melancholy, a low-level despair that colored everything. He was just absent, serving out his time, a prisoner of existence waiting for parole. He missed his friends. Sammy died in 1990 of throat cancer, and that was another blow, another reminder that time was running out for all of them. But mostly, he missed the boy on the mountain. That was a wound that never healed, the absence that defined his final years. He told a friend once, "I'm not afraid of dying. Why should I be? Everyone I love is already there." It was a profound statement of faith and fatigue, of a man ready to move on to whatever comes next, hoping it would mean reunion with his son. In September of 1993, doctors at Cedars-Sinai diagnosed Dean with lung cancer. Decades of chain smoking had finally caught up with him. They told him he would need surgery immediately to prolong his life, to give him more time. His response was tragic, but perhaps inevitable. The man he had been before losing his son probably would have said yes, would have fought for every extra day. But that man was long gone. To his family's dismay, Dean refused the surgery. He was done fighting. He was ready to go. "Everyone I love is already there," he had said, and he meant it. He retired from public life in early 1995. No more dinners at La Famiglia. No more polite smiles for fans. He stayed in his house on Mountain Drive, surrounded by the silence he had been cultivating for 8 years. Friends like Shirley MacLaine would visit and beg him to fight, to try to live longer. But Dean had made his peace. Or rather, he had accepted the lack of peace, accepted that his life was over in every meaningful sense, and was just waiting for the formality of death. And then the end finally came. It was Christmas Day, 1995, a date that would seem poetically perfect for a man who had made Marshmallow World, and Baby It's Cold Outside into holiday anthems. Dean Martin lay in his bed at home in Beverly Hills. His breathing was shallow, rattling in his chest. The emphysema caused by a lifetime of cigarettes had claimed his lungs, but it was the grief that had claimed his will to breathe, his will to continue existing in a world that had taken everything that mattered. He was 78 years old, though he looked 100, as the world outside celebrated Christmas morning, as families gathered around trees, and children opened presents and people sang carols. Dean Martin closed his eyes. There was no struggle, no panic, no dramatic final words. Just a gentle exhaling. A final release of the burden he had carried for 8 years, for months, and 4 days. The silence he had sought for so long finally embraced him completely. When the news broke on December 25th, the lights on the Las Vegas Strip were dimmed in his honor, something reserved only for the greatest of the greats. The world mourned the loss of an icon. Tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment world. Frank Sinatra, devastated and frail himself at age 80, wept for his brother. Dean was my brother, not through blood but through choice, Frank would say through his tears. Jerry Lewis issued a statement full of regret and sorrow for the years they had wasted feuding. Hollywood lost one of its brightest stars. America lost one of its most beloved entertainers. But for those who really loved Dean, there was a sense of relief mixed with a sadness. They knew that he wasn't suffering anymore. They knew that the prison sentence had finally ended. They knew that somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, the pilot had landed and the father was waiting at the gate. The reunion that Dean had been aching for since March 1987 had finally happened. Dino Jr. was flying again, free from gravity, and Dean Martin was finally at peace. The funeral at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills was attended by over 100 friends and family. Jerry Lewis was there, tears streaming down his face for the partner he had loved and lost again. Angie Dickinson was there. Shirley MacLaine was there. Robert Wagner was there. All of Hollywood turned out one more time to say goodbye. They sang the Ave Maria and mourned not just the entertainer, but the man who had shown them that beneath the coolest exterior could beat the most vulnerable heart. The tragic irony of Dean Martin's life is that he spent 40 years trying to make us laugh, creating an image of effortless, cool, and carefree joy. But his story ends in tears, in a father's inconsolable grief that no amount of fame or money could ease. Yet in that tragedy, there is a beautiful and terrible lesson. It teaches us that fame is nothing. Money is dust. Awards are just metal and wood. The applause fades. The shows end. The records stop playing. The only thing that truly matters, the only thing that can break a man as strong and cool as Dean Martin, is love. He loved his son so much that he couldn't survive without him, and that, in its own heartbreaking way, is the most noble legacy of all. It reminds us that beneath every cool exterior, beneath every carefully crafted public persona, beats a human heart capable of profound love and devastating loss. So the next time you hear That's Amore on the radio, don't just hear the jokes and the Italian charm. Listen to the voice. Listen to the warmth and the humanity behind it. And remember the man who died of a broken heart on a snowy mountain, and the father who spent his last years staring at an empty chair, having dinner with a ghost, waiting for his boy to come home. Remember that the king of cool lost the only thing that ever kept him warm. Dean Martin's life teaches us that you can have everything the world considers important and still have nothing if you lose the one thing that gave it all meaning. His 8-year vigil in that Beverly Hills mansion wasn't pathetic or weak. It was the truest expression of love imaginable, a father's heart simply unable to beat properly in a world without his son. Rest in peace, Dean. You finally got your reunion. Rest in peace, Dino. You finally got your father back. And somewhere beyond the lights of Vegas, beyond the mountains of California, beyond the silence and grief, we can hope that they're together again. Father and son, best friends, the king of cool and his golden boy, playing one more round of golf on a course where the sun never sets, and there are no more goodbyes. If you found this story as heartbreaking and powerful as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These stories of Hollywood's hidden pain need to be told, and your support helps us continue bringing them to light. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.